He failed the interview, folded the rejection letter in his trembling hands, and walked away with his head down, never knowing that behind the glass walls of the tallest building, a billionaire CEO had just stood up in shock, and was about to run after a single dad who reminded him of the one mistake he could never forgive himself for. Right finger if stories of kindness, second chances, and unexpected humanity move your heart, like this video and subscribe to True Kindness Tales. Your support keeps these stories alive. The interview room smelled of polished wood and expensive silence, the kind that made people feel smaller than they already were, and Arav felt that weight pressing on his chest as he answered the final question with honesty rather than polish. He was a single father, had gaps in his resume, had turned down promotions because his daughter had asthma and hospital visits, didn't care about corporate schedules, and as he spoke, he could see it in the panel's eyes, the polite nods, the tight smiles, the unspoken conclusion forming before he even finished his sentence. When the HR manager thanked him for his time, Arav already knew what that meant. He shook hands, smiled softly, and walked out with the quiet dignity of someone used to disappointment. In the elevator, he stared at his reflection, adjusting the same tie he'd worn to his last 3 interviews, and thought of his daughter waiting at home, probably pretending not to worry while counting the minutes. By the time he reached the lobby, his phone buzzed with an email notification he didn't need to open to understand. "We regret to inform you." He folded the phone into his pocket and stepped outside, the city roaring around him, indifferent and fast. Inside the building, on the top floor, Billionaire CEO Rohan Mehra stood frozen, staring at the resume still glowing on his tablet. Something about Arav's answers, his calm honesty, the way he spoke about responsibility rather than ambition, had struck a nerve he hadn't felt in years. Rohan had built an empire on brilliance and speed, but somewhere along the way, he had sacrificed people who couldn't keep up, including one man long ago, a single father whose potential he had dismissed as inconvenient. That man had left, and months later, Rohan had learned the cost of that decision in a way money could never fix. Now, watching Arav walk away on the security monitor, shoulders slightly slumped but spine still straight, that old regret came rushing back like a wound reopening. The boardroom behind him buzzed with discussion, but Rohan wasn't listening anymore. His heart pounded as he realized he was about to repeat the same mistake. Without explaining himself, he stood up, ignored the confused looks of his executives, and strode toward the door, the echo of his footsteps loud and urgent. Down below, Arav crossed the street, the rejection letter now creased from his grip, telling himself he'd find another way, that he always did, unaware that the man who controlled half the skyline was about to do something no one had ever seen him do: run, not for profit, not for power, but for a second chance he desperately hoped wasn't already too late. Arav didn't hear the footsteps at first, drowned out by traffic and his own thoughts, but when a voice called his name, clear, breathless, and urgent, he stopped as if the world itself had tapped his shoulder. He turned slowly, confused, and saw a sharply dressed man standing a few feet away, chest rising and falling as if he'd sprinted the entire block, his tie loosened, his expression raw and unguarded. "Please," Rohan said, holding up a hand, "don't go yet." For a moment, Arav thought it was a mistake, that perhaps this man had confused him for someone else, but then recognition dawned: the CEO himself, the face from business magazines, the man whose name crowned the building he'd just walked out of. People around them slowed, curious, phones subtly lifting, but Rohan didn't seem to care. "I know the email you just received," he said quietly, lowering his voice, "and I need you to know it doesn't tell the whole story." Arav's first instinct was embarrassment, then pride, then a flicker of anger. "Sir," he replied respectfully, "I understand your decision. Thank you for the opportunity." He turned as if to leave, but Rohan stepped forward again, desperation slipping into his usually controlled tone. "Years ago," he said, "I rejected a man like you. Brilliant, honest, responsible, but his life didn't fit neatly into our expectations. He was a single father too. I told myself it was just business." His voice cracked, just slightly. 3 months later, I found out he'd taken a job that broke him. He collapsed at work. His son found him. Silence fell between them, heavy and unforgiving. Arav felt his throat tighten, not just from the story, but from the fear it mirrored, the constant balancing act, the exhaustion, the invisible pressure. "I promised myself," Rohan continued, eyes fixed on Arav, "that if I ever saw that look again, the look of someone walking away carrying more responsibility than the world knows, I wouldn't stay seated behind glass." Arav swallowed hard. He thought of his daughter's smile, her small hands gripping his shirt when she had trouble breathing, and the countless nights he'd stayed awake wondering how long he could keep going. "I'm not asking for sympathy," he said softly. "I just want work I can do with dignity." Rohan nodded, relief and resolve mixing in his expression. "Then come back," he said. "Not for the position you applied for, but for one we should have offered in the first place. Flexible hours, real support, and a culture that doesn't punish people for being human." Arav hesitated, the weight of years of rejection making trust feel dangerous, but something in Rohan's eyes, regret laid bare, unshielded by wealth, felt real. Slowly, he nodded, and in that small movement, two men acknowledged something larger than success. That kindness, once chosen, could rewrite more than a resume, it could change a life's direction. The office felt different when Arav walked back in, not because the marble floors had softened or the lights had dimmed, but because he no longer felt invisible. Over the following weeks, his presence transformed more than his own circumstances. He worked with focus and gratitude, not out of fear, but out of purpose, and his ideas, shaped by years of problem-solving under pressure, began saving the company time, money, and something less measurable but more valuable, morale. Rohan watched quietly, often from a distance, noticing how Arav mentored younger employees, how he left promptly at a reasonable hour without apology, how he spoke openly about parenthood without shame. Policies began to change, not announced with grand speeches, but implemented with intention. Flexible schedules, emergency family leave, a new metric of leadership that included empathy. One evening, Rohan found Arav packing up his desk, smiling as he checked his phone. "My daughter's breathing test came back normal today," Arav said simply, and in that moment, Rohan felt a tightness in his chest, not pain, but release. Months later, at a company town hall, Rohan told the story, not naming Arav, but admitting his own failure, his own learning. The applause that followed wasn't for profit margins or expansion plans, but for honesty. After the event, Arav stood at the back, watching employees laugh and talk, and realized something profound: he hadn't just been given a job, he'd been given respect. That night, as he tucked his daughter into bed, she asked, "Did you have a good day, Papa?" He smiled, brushing her hair back. "Yes," he said, voice steady, and it all started because someone chose to be kind. Across the city, Rohan looked out over the skyline he owned and understood, perhaps for the first time, that his greatest legacy wouldn't be the buildings bearing his name, but the moment he stood up and ran after a man everyone else had let walk away. Right finger if this story touched your heart and reminded you that kindness can change destinies. Please like this video and subscribe to True Kindness Tales, because every share helps spread stories the world needs to hear.